to the second session of the Connecticut State Art Standards webinars. I'm Cindy Parsons. I'm hosting today's session. We're excited today to have our STEAM webinar presented by Laurel Archambault from Simsbury Public Schools. Laurel will be presenting for about 45 minutes to an hour, and hopefully you're able to see a live chat box on your screen. Do not see if you can find that. And you're welcome to add any questions or comments during the presentation. We will try to get to all your questions and comments after her presentation ends. We'll continue with a question and answer session. Laurel is an artist and a visual art educator who teaches at Henry James Middle School in Simsbury. She's been a teacher since 1995 and has been in middle school that long. She's been working with her district and with her school to start working with STEAM units in the art room, and is also been a team mentor and a master mentor for Simsbury Public Schools. She's on the Unified Arts team leader. She's on the leadership team, and she's also serves on the State Department of Education committees, doing curriculum work and summer institute work. So Laurel, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and hopefully we'll have some great responses and some questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Cindy Parsons. Wonderful introduction. Welcome, everybody, to the webinar for STEAM Creative Art Stations. Very excited to introduce this to you, and just a couple little things to intro as we go through the first few slides. As Cindy went over, my name is Laurel Archambault, and I've been here at Simsbury for 21 years. Can't believe it's been that long. My contact info is here, and you can certainly, access this later and get a hold of me if you have any specific questions too, if we don't answer them at the end. Webinar overview, excuse me. Just a few things we're going to go over. It's kind of the reasons for connecting to STEAM and how I got started in doing that, the setup of my room and the layout, the different stations that I offer to the students as we go through the STEAM process. Example handouts, I'm going to show you that too through the slides. How students are assessed within their work and how they go through that process. Also connecting to various standards. I'm going to connect to the National Core Visual Arts Standard, which are also now adopted as the Connecticut Visual Arts Standards. I also touch on content area standards. I'll get into that in a little bit more detail later, and Common Core standards in both math and in reading and writing. In the final area, it's kind of a little reflection of what I would change and how I'd improve the actual webinar, or excuse me, the actual process of the STEAM stations themselves. All right, so the first thing, reasons for connecting to STEAM. First of all, STEAM is the integration of science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And honestly, we've been doing this for years in the art classroom. So I just thought it was such a natural thing to do when I joined the STEM committee here, which I keep saying, oh, it's a STEAM committee. Where's the arts? And they're like, oh, yeah, I do that, because I would always show my connections. Sorry, our bell just rang. In art class, I was basically integrating STEAM concepts anyway. So in doing so, there are certain areas that I would make those connections. I'll show that to you in a later slide. And I just mentioned how we have a STEAM committee. So they were taking on a STEM model in our school where the science classrooms were going to be expanded. They're also going to expand our library to make it more of a maker station area as well within the library. And so we include that in our classroom. So try to do our best to kind of really inform them in the area of STEAM. And I think the high schools really adopted a STEAM concept as well. So kind of pushing that in our school here. All right. What I was already doing, so some of the areas that we were already working on in our classroom, because I had a few stations already available, included architecture. So you can see the student right over here doing a great job using Kiva planks. And I'll go much more in detail when we show that slide for you. 3D pen design was a couple stations that I would have for students as well. So if they finish a work of art early, they would go to these stations and work on those. And also stop motion animation, where they actually have to have a little time where they plan for the animation and then they would actually be able to produce it using our iPads. Okay. So, I'm sorry, did you have a question? Okay, thought there was a background question there. What I was already doing, we had Artsonia that we've been working with. So with Artsonia, we actually load artwork onto an online exhibition website. So this is what we do with all of our students, 7th grade and 8th grade. And in 7th grade, we teach them that process. They are able to load their own artwork, which is a great connection already to the presenting for the National Art Standard. Many things that they do with that, compare and contrast how technologies have changed, the way the artwork is preserved and presented and experienced, and also based on criteria, analyze and evaluate methods for preparing and presenting art. They had to get to the point of presenting their own work when they did that. So we teach them that whole process with the Artsonia. You can see down here, they're actually in the process of doing that. We have a QR code that they use the iPad and they load in to that to the Artsonia site. We use background paper. You can see the student that had done an architectural design. He's holding a backdrop for that, so it's just a really nice background. They have to understand proper presentation of their work. And then the student right now is taking a photo using the iPad, and then he loads and he can crop and change that. And that is done for every work of art they create, so we have an ongoing portfolio of their work, which was very helpful for this whole STEAM station process. There's actually a link right here. I would try to click on it, but I'm not sure it's going to work for us through the webinar. I can certainly share that with people if they'd like to see that. I want to expand those stations to include all STEAM areas with choices. So 2 activities per content area for both science, for technology, and engineering and math that obviously have art as a focus for each one. I was not connected to having all STEAM included in each station, so they didn't have to have all of those areas for each station I was working on. They had to have the content area and then the art, and understand and explain how that worked. However, some kids would expand much more than that and be able to explain many STEAM connections. Okay, I also knew they could make more connections later when they explain their STEAM areas, so we'll talk about that in a future slide as well. Here is the beginning setup. So I was kind of created this cart to align with what the students were doing in the classroom. You can see the stations are aligned with 1 through 8 on here. So my first station, I had an area out in the room that had a poster that described the process of what they were going to do. Right here, number 1 would correlate with that. They might have handouts or things they might need here on this cart, and then work at the station. So you can see all the way up through 8. Each area would contain that. So some items were found at the station. Some items were right at this cart that they might need to use. Like 3D pens, I kind of house right here just because I didn't want kids just to use them without having gone through the planning process first. Oops, little mouse is not working, sorry. All right, now here's where I've integrated a few photos of students actually in the process, or where you can kind of see the room layout. You're going to see this process a little later, but some stations could be completed, like I said, at the tables, and I'll kind of show you the table area. And then here you're kind of seeing the back section of the room where we had animation and some students working on 3D pens. Use little 3D pens in a different view. And the rest of the room you'll kind of see in this little video. So I'm going to attempt to play this. Let's hope that this works without any... Whatever. It's really nice. We did a good job doing poetry for the other one. So here's some students working at the tables in the process. She's doing the second portion. I'll show you the marbling later. Now we're going over to where the pottery wheels are. Give me an evil look. Kids are funny. Okay, keep in mind your colors, because that makes a difference too, based on what you're doing. Does it cool? Why is it cool? What did you do that you think is so cool about it? What's so cool about it?
Like the colors.
No pressure though. He could never mess up unless he would have stopped. So in that one, you kind of saw a little close-up of probably one of the next clips I'll show you where a student is working on the pottery wheel. But I just wanted to show you the layout of the room. You saw me looking at the tables first and then kind of walking across the room to the pottery wheels. So my room is well spread out. I did have little station areas set up, and I'll show you some of it. Right back here, you can actually see a board set up for 3D pen design. This number right here is the number that correlates on the cart that I was talking about before. And there's some images here, also directions. Most likely I had the content standards on there as well for the area that they focused on. Okay. Okay, room layout. Each of the stations had a board with a description like I just showed you. This one, I didn't have the number on here yet when she first started this one, but I did connect that later. It explained the process and connections you can see here. This is the next gen science standards that are connected to what they were doing for marbling. And then I also had a PowerPoint running in the room that would continuously loop to talk about each of the areas and give those directions as well. So they had multiple ways of seeing the directions, as well as a handout that had 2 pages that also had the directions and process on there for them. So they were, if they were a visual learner, they can kind of look at it. They're also able to learn from each other. So that was very nice. Here are the stations that I had, and like I said, I'll go through each of them just so you can get more in-depth understanding. For science, I had centrifugal force and marbling surface tension. So centrifugal force you saw when I went to that pottery wheel. Technology, stop motion animation, machine drawing. And then engineering is architecture and the 3D pen design. And in math, we did a Kaleidoscope Cycle, a very cool thing, and grid drawing. Okay. So as we get to these stations, you're going to see, like I said, a few videos. This one looks familiar, very similar to the one you just saw before. For the scientific centrifugal force, it was a lot about color mixing. We talked about how those colors would mix, scientifically what happens when colors mix visually, Newton's laws of motion, especially centrifugal force itself. I really had the students hypothesize. They would hypothesize first, do a couple little things that they write about, experiment a little with different variables, like the amount of water, the speed of the wheel, the use of marker and water, and how that would interact. And down here you can see a couple final results where they had this great color mixing. She really wanted to use the warmer colors. This person happened to use the cooler colors and how they mixed together. A student could choose to create a Mandela-like design at the end if they had a little extra time and they were able to do so. They had to actually all use a little cutout first to practice on. Then they went on to a larger version. This one's about 10 inches in size. You can see her on the second version right here. So we'll take a little look at the clip.
I'm getting a little video of you guys in action. Do the overhead view. Let's see you actually do it. No pressure though. Very nice. You're still doing it.
You can see how hers is not aligned well. So we talked about how to place it in the center and work on alignment. That one student that was in the corner did not, look at the distance around, being parallel all the way around to make sure the radial effect would work as well. You can tell it's highly motivating. They were so excited to be on the pottery wheels and then using the paint, playing with it, experimenting. The only hard part, I think, is having a place to write, because they would be in the process of doing this. They'd have to stop and kind of just jot down some notes for themselves. So sometimes that was a little difficult to work through, but we figured it out. Here's the second station. This is the marbling surface tension. So we worked with properties of matter and the surface tension and how there's actually chalk that we're using that floats on the surface. I'll have the student actually describe this process to you a little more. Effects of light and how the human eye sees in silhouette. So we worked with these 2 scientific concepts. Right here you can actually see the process of it floating. They would put multiple colors in. Like I said, you can see the student in progress too. But here's some final versions of what the students would do. So plans for that, and also that secondary process. Earlier in that video, you saw one student at the tables where she was cutting out her silhouette. So let's take a look at this little video.
Marbling. Can you explain the process?
Take a knife and scrape small bits of chalk onto water.
Yep.
And use great tension. And then you take a piece of paper onto the water, and the colors show up in a pretty way.
Excellent. Yep. Marbly kind of a way. Yeah, very good. How do you get to look more marbly? What's the marbly effect? How do you do that?
I come to take the back of a paintbrush.
Yeah.
And then swirl it.
Awesome. Yeah, really nice job. Where's your peaches right there that you did last, right?
You can see that Amory was in the process of actually doing the chalk portion and was not putting the paper on yet, but they had to do each step in a very cautious way. If you put the paper in wrong, it wouldn't connect to the chalk in the right way. Some people would submerge it all the way and then the chalk wouldn't show up. So sometimes there's some trial and error, which was a lot of fun during the station. So it was great for them to go through that trial and error process. Once a student got it, they would often teach another student the process as well. And to go to the next station. Third station is technology, the stop motion animation. Students use an iPad and iStop motion app, which I love it because it does show a ghost image where they last placed whatever object they are moving. And so you could see the ghost image, move a little bit, and then retake a photo. And majority of these, the two that you're going to see for videos that students made, probably had at least 150 actual individual photos when they were taking these. So a lot of fun. The process for planning on this one, it was a little more extensive. They had to do a little worksheet where they had a storyboard and design storyline. They designed also sets and objects in some cases for this. Some were much more ornate than others. So I will show you some of those. Here's the planning with two students that wanted to work together, which I had no problem with if they wanted to work with a buddy. They were just working together on an idea, so then they came up with, this is the one they actually created down here. You'll see the little video. Hopefully the videos flow for you smoothly. Cute, simple little video. I wish, I think the next thing we'll start working on is getting a voiceover, or they're going to add music. I was talking to the music tech person at our school, and she's very interested in doing some background music that they could associate with these. So we were talking a little about that. So maybe it's going to be a nice little connection there next year. Another student example. They could bring things in that they could use if they so chose. The student wanted to draw and have objects going through. So very cute how those two students decided to do their work. Okay, the technology station for machine drawing, a lot of fun. I have to say this one was funny. The kids really enjoyed this because it was just, there was no pressure on the final design being something beautiful. It was just them creating and what was it they were creating with a machine and how did they get that machine to actually draw? How did they make that happen? Excuse me. So the students had to create an abstract drawing by using a machine. They experimented with multiple machines, including a remote control bug and a pull and go car. So we do have a full video of the bug in motion.
Nice introduction. So funny. I used to make it spin again because that was pretty funny.
So you can see how much he enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, they would do multiple things and then come up with their final design. Because you kind of had to experiment first to see what was working for you. If you liked the straighter lines, the curvy lines, you wanted a mix. So it was just a lot of fun to experiment with that one. All right, engineering, which is the architecture. Students had to design and construct a building or object using Kiva planks, which are great. They do not connect, you don't glue them together or anything, they're reusable. So they're freestanding designs which are not attached, but they must be able to balance to stay in place, which is key. The student puts it so eloquently, so hopefully you can hear this video well.
So what are you constructing?
I haven't quite decided. I think it's going to be either like a house or a castle. It's going to be like one of them, but I'm not sure.
What did you find difficult in engineering your students so far?
Just making sure everything's balanced. One thing solved.
Yeah. Yeah, very nice. I get a little view in different ways. The little spirals are awesome. Did you have a hard time with the spiral portion?
No, because you can wait in the center that
it'll balance it out. Yeah, very nice. Beautiful job. Let's take a little close up of that. Awesome work. Yeah, very nice.
This is her finished version of that. I love how she talked about the weight in the center. so meaningful and really important for what they did. And I don't know if you heard in the background, because there was a lot of background noise on that one, where a student was actually using the Kiva planks at a different location, and theirs fell because their balance was not quite on. So sometimes it's experimenting with what's going to actually work and how is it going to stand. You can see some other beautiful examples by students through this process. So just amazing. I really love the Kiva blocks. Great for the architectural structure, especially the fact that it's not permanent, and they use the photo to keep these. So what I do is I will actually print the photos and put that in our art show when we have our art show time. The stations for engineering, it's a 3D pen. This is number 6 station. Just great final results. And we did a lot of trial and error with the 3D pens. This is the first year we started using these. And that's why I said at the beginning of the year I kind of started out with playing with this. I think maybe the end of last year we brought them in. But students had to plan and design something using the 3D pen and filament. And just to warn you, always use the PLA, which is an organic plant-based filament, rather than the ABS. ABS is very bad for you to breathe in, so unless you're in a very well-ventilated area, please use the PLA. So that's the type we always order. They could choose to make a relief or a sculpture in the round, but they had to make sure it was secure in their engineering of the design. So you can look at these final versions. This one actually is just a flat relief form. These two all are very freestanding. You can see this one were made kind of a cube design. We'll let you take a look at Harper and work. So when you saw Harper in process, she is working on waxed paper, which we found really the best way to work with this if you're going to kind of sketch out a flat design first and then work from that. I had some students that wanted something more curved, so I actually would work on a ceramic piece. Sometimes we put the wax paper over it so you could kind of form that curve. It's a little tough to work when people, I don't know if you've ever seen maybe a commercial with 3D pens where they kind of just pull it up and it stays straight. You can do that, but it takes a lot of time and you really have to support the piece. When Harper was working down here, you saw her kind of touch it after. It does dry, cools off very quickly. So as she was touching, it was already pretty much cool in that area. You cannot touch the tip. That's the biggest thing. It gets to 200 degrees. So we do talk a lot about safety with that process. But just you can see some really amazing results as long as you really think through what you want to construct before you begin constructing. Math the Kaleidoscope Cycle. This one, a lot of fun. Kids have a hard time because they have to be so precise. So students would create a hexagonal Kaleidoscope cycle. Number of faces is 24, the number of edges is 30, number of vertices is 12. It is 6 tetrahedra that are put together. So again, all these math terms that we're talking about, all these geometric forms that need to work in process together to make this infinitely turn. They use a paper template to design using similar colors as it went across in a diamond formation, and then they need to fold very accurately. So some kids, of course, found the folding a little tricky. So I'll let you see this in action where it spins. Oops. These kids, aren't they cute? You can hear there's an announcement on there as well at the same time. But you can see how you can just continually turn it around. It'll continually do that infinitely. But beautiful final design. The more intricate they made the structures, or if they wanted to kind of connect something, they could. So as kids got a little more advanced in this, they might even make a character in the center that would come together. So just a lot of fun to play with and learning their math, of course. And then one of the final stations is the math, which is the grid drawing, using math to demonstrate proportion and ratio by enlarging the drawing with accuracy. And you can see some final versions here, how the student used the grid, placing it, getting the right proper size for the paper. They actually had to find the correct paper themselves. I told them where paper sizes were. They had to multiply and decide where that would be, which paper is the right one to use, and then doing the grid drawing. You can see him in the process over here with the grid down here, and I will show you a little video of a student in progress.
Can you do a little description of what you're working on and what you did to create this?
I made this grid bigger, and I started drawing a bird to match up with the lines on the grid.
How did you do the transition from the grid to the larger grid? What was the difference there? Mathematically, what did you have to do?
I would have to measure the ruler and stuff and see where it is.
size? Are these boxes? What size are those boxes? What's the difference there?
4 by 6, and this is wait, okay, it's times 3, right?
Right. Yep.
So 12 by 8.
Right, and so you had to do like 3 inches on that one, and then 1 inch on the other. Good. So your ratio proportions had to change. That's awesome. Can you hold up your bird for 1 second? Nice. Good. Hold up the little one too, because next to it. Beautiful job. Good. And you learned which area of the STEAM components for this one. Very good. Mathematical. Nice job.
Cute with that one. You can see her in the background. She's actually loading one of her works of art on Artsonia at the time while she was talking about her work. But just a great process and an interesting way for them to learn math. They were so excited when they would draw a large one because they could see how accurate it was. And they started just using this in the classroom too in a different project. They would actually say, oh, can I make my animal bigger by using the evidence? Of course you can use the grid to do that. So it's nice they're taking that and applying it, of course. Okay, and so the next section we're going to talk about is documenting the work and the handouts that we use for this process. So once a station was complete, all students must document their work and load it on Artsonia like I talked about before. We had photo stations available for students to take the digital photo of 3-dimensional work, and then if it's 2-dimensional, they would just lay it flat and then take their photo directly above. So I actually teach that process. So they take nice photos for what they are creating so that they are as accurate to what they look like in person. You can see right here, there's a student that's loading one that she did for the centrifugal force design. Over here, he had done the marbling, so this is one he's loading on right now. They're able to make a title, and they're also able to include like a written description about their work as well for this process. All right, so in this part for the documenting and the handouts, we went into the computer lab as a whole group when we were getting towards the end of this. Not everybody was totally finished with this process. But they went into Google Classroom and they pasted their Artsonia images into the corresponding content area where they focused on. So they explained the STEAM connections, and my wonderful supervisor came up with the idea, well, why don't you just have the letter S-T-E-A-M, and they can explain whichever ones they connect with. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea. So in the Google Classroom form that they had to fill out, that's what I did. I had this exact layout right here where they had the S-T-E-A-M, and they would put those connections in. Now, if they had a science connection, they would use the S and then the A because they had to have, I had to have the content area and they had to have art for every, area. However, some kids would see connections in different areas as well. So they would include any STEAM connection. Some students would find 5 in, in each station. So it was pretty amazing to see their connections they were building and making. So here's a little way that he inserted that piece. And then he's in Google Classroom just writing his answers. You can see the STEAM is right here. So by describing how the process artwork demonstrates the STEAM focus. So just a really great way to have me understand that they knew what they were talking about as they went through each of the stations. And the more they did a different station for a different content area, the more like, oh my gosh, hey, this applies over here too. So they would see a connection in math and also in engineering, and they would talk about what those connections would be. So it's just really great to see the multiple connections they were making as they did this. All right, so here's an example of a student. Oh, yes, a very highly phenomenal student, I must say. Not all students would do all 8 stations, and the reason for that is, just timing. They had to make sure that they got 1 from science, that they had 1 station from technology, 1 from math, and 1 from engineering, and of course, art was always integrated. So this student, named Sarah, she did every connection in some of these. Maybe not all of them, but how amazing is it to see these connections she made for every content area of STEAM when she was doing the centrifugal force and how those connections were made. And here she has, 3 of the 5. Same with this one. Here she has 5 of the 5. So it's great to see that they connected in much more than just the content area I had stated, especially through our discussions or talking with other students. So a lot of fun to see that final result with what they had done. And they were amazed by the connections. And then, of course, our other projects we did, we were doing a sculpture unit shortly after this, and they were like, oh, hey, this is a math connection right here because da, 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 da. And they would talk about those connections. In technology, they'd talk about how technology is a connection for every unit we do because we take a photograph of every piece that we do. So great to see that they're making those connections, not only during our STEAM unit, but in every unit we would start to do, which is a lot of fun. All right, documenting the work. Here is kind of the first hand that they were given. They had to sort of plan this way. I would talk about each of the stations, so it's handed out to them before we started anything. They decided which stations they want to begin. They had to have 1 from science they would start with, 1 from technology, 1 from engineering, and 1 from math. So they had to select ahead of time. They could always change their mind. I had no problem with that. but they had to have minimum of at least 4 because they had to hit every content area. And then I would say most kids did about 6 stations. I did have quite a few kids that did 8 total. Very few that only did 4, so it was nice to have a little time to kind of get around to each station. Excuse me. They observed me doing demonstrations at each station. And then, of course, because time would go by, they might get a little rusty, but I had my running PowerPoint. And I also had students that would teach each other. So if one student was at a station kind of finishing up, they would show the next student coming over, especially at the 3D pens, especially at the centrifugal force station, because some of those are pretty kind of high tech, and they would have to really understand that. And if they were forgetting from before, the student before them would demonstrate that process. And they would kind of just observe for a little bit to understand. Okay, so how students were assessed through the process. I constantly supervise and discuss the design process and the creative process of the students while they participate in the stations. Content connections for each area were a focus on each station as well. I could also see where they were because I would check Artsonia and see what stage they were in, because then I had 3 different classes doing this at one time, so it was a lot of different works of art that were kind of being produced. So it was nice for me to be able to go into Artsonia. And in Artsonia, when you do the student loading, the teacher can go in, and that you have to be the one that allows it to be loaded onto Artsonia before it shows up. So that way I can check the title, make sure it's spelled correctly, making sure the content in their written descriptions are appropriate. And so I would go in and do that, and also if I had a crop or whatever. So I could see what they had been putting into Artsonia to know later what was going into Google Classroom, and then also checking through Google Classroom. I also had students demonstrate and teach each other. So in the process of them teaching, I saw their accuracy. I would kind of see their process first before they were teaching somebody else. And it's great to see them reinforce their knowledge and help others. So like I said, students had a minimum of 4 stations that they had to complete before they were completely done with this. And like I said, if they had excess time, a lot of kids wanted to try to get to all 8 stations. That was great. I have a little extra time offered, so if they were kind of a little bit lagging behind other students, they could certainly come down during their homerooms when they have a little time, or study halls. I would leave that open for them to do at any time. So it's a great way. I had quite a few, like I said, they got all 8 stations done. Here's how students are assessed in the summative manner. So when students completed the Google Classroom, the photo documentation, the STEAM description, they submit to me the summative assessment. So this is a common assessment. Now, we don't necessarily all do the stations yet. This is something new that we've kind of developed this year that I've been working on. But we have been working on STEAM as a unit. So I used to do just a 1 unit where they would work on something that was STEAM related. So this assessment, the summative assessment, has to cover not only doing stations, but also doing an individual kind of project that talks about STEAM. So we made it open enough where you could do that, but also hit on all the areas that are really important to you, either doing stations or doing your unit. So here, having the planning or the process. So for me, it was much more about the process. Their planning for this one was much more about, I think I'm gonna do this station first or this one first, now that you show me this. And in a different unit, I might have a whole planning worksheet that they have to go through. So we can assess that either way. We'd love to open up where they can do that. Creativity or originality, expression and written description of the STEAM concepts, really important at the end of any unit that we do, that they are able to understand those concepts, that they get, that it's science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and that they can verbalize that to us and really demonstrate that understanding, not only through written work, but also through their design itself. Media and craftsmanship, always important. Even though we were very experimental here, I still wanted to see that they took their time, that they thought about it, they explored, and they got to the final process. So they would do some planning. For example, the centrifugal force, where they would work on little mini versions first, and then say, okay, now I know what I want to do. I want these colors to mix because they mix better, or whatever their process might be for that. And then, of course, focus effort in the artwork that they do. Being on task, they're doing the right thing. Sometimes with stations, you can get kids that get so excited and they want to run around, so that kind of focus is really important. Okay, so here's connecting to the standards. This is the big thing. Because we had so much we were offering with these stations, I found that I connected to so many standards. It was awesome. Certain ones might stand out more than others. But for the common, the National Core Visual Arts Standards, which are also the Connecticut standards at this point, we had multiple ones in creating that we touched on. Now, I really don't need to go, walking through each one of these, but I think especially applying to, overcoming creative blocks. This one, you really are experimenting, really getting through the process of understanding what this is, seeing some other students and what they've come up with, and then what is your process in doing so. Especially demonstrating persistence in developing the skills with various materials, huge in this one. So you can see that there's a lot in the creating component. Responding also, interpreting, analyzing, art-making approaches, they really had to explain their STEAM connections, so that was huge. Right here is the presenting. We talked all about Artsonia and how they presented their work, and then also popping it into Google Classroom and talking about those STEAM connections through the S, T, E, A, and M. And then the final one, connecting. So here's those big connections as well, even through the presenting, but also the connecting itself, especially connecting to our other content areas was just huge in this. I was talking to our science teacher here. I'm hoping he said, like, oh, we have a few microscopes we want to get rid of. They aren't as high-powered. Like, I would love to take that, because how cool would it be to integrate, you know, students looking at a microscope and then like really exaggerating the size of, say, I don't know, a pine cone, and how does that look up close, and how would you sketch that? So we talked a lot about some other scientific connections, and those connections are just amazing. All right, connecting to the standards here, these are coming into the content area standards. You know, not something you have to do in your art classroom if you're an art teacher, but something I wanted to do here, especially to really push that whole STEAM concept in our STEM schools, because it's such a huge, there's so many huge connections that were made, especially, you know, in the next gen science standards. I'm pretty on top of what they were doing, and they're just kind of starting that in our school anyway. So it's just an amazing, you know, kind of connections here with that. So especially the earth systems, we talked so much about, you know, like how water works and that surface tension, you know, so many things. Planning out and carrying out investigations is exactly what we were doing, the experimental, you know, process, how they go through, how they investigate something, the hypothesis they would make. So just so many connections with this, especially with the centrifugal force and the marbling. All right, connected to the standards here. This one is, it's funny because I had a little bit of a harder time finding the way to get to the tech ed connections in the engineering, but I found this to be the most associated with the design process, because we are so aligned with that design process that they use in engineering technology and in tech ed. So very similar in art. So quite a few areas were touched with this one. So the stop motion animation, the machine drawing, architecture, 3D pen design, all very strongly relate to these content area standards. Okay, you can see some nice other, here's a 3D pen design, another Kiva plank design that we did for architecture. All right, so here are some common core standards for the math. Solve problems involving scale drawings of geometric figures, including computing actual lengths and areas from scale drawing and reproducing the scale. How great is that compared to this ratio design where they did the proportions and they had to make it larger? It's like fits exactly, so the geometry there. And then drawing the freehand with a ruler or protractor, geometric shapes that given conditions. So we've talked about the use of the Kaleidoscope Cycle and how it had to be so specific and those angles had to be exact. So it was just great, and the students had that knowledge they brought in from math already, so they were the ones telling me about the angles, which is wonderful. Ratio and proportion again, so that connects right down here with our ratio and proportion with the grid drawing. So just some amazing connections through the math standards. Here, the ELA in writing, writing arguments to support the claims, to clear reasons and relevant evidence. They had to exactly do that when they were putting their work into Google Classroom and tell me how they connected to every area of STEAM for STEAM. So just amazing. So having to have a logical reason, evidence, accurate things that they're showing. So they actually had visual examples to support that. So quite amazing to have those connections. Yeah, all right. Reflection. So as I look over, you know, what I had done during that whole quarter working with these different stations, certain things I would change and improve. We actually did the rubric revision. So the rubric that you're seeing right there was a revision we made kind of towards the end of what I was doing with my students. We had it a little too closed in on having to have a real specific planning before you would create, and that didn't really work for the stations because it's much more experimental and exploratory. So we made sure that common rubric really showed that it could go either way. So we kind of put a planning out, or you had experimentation going on. So we wanted to make it flexible enough to really show that. So my coworker, Christy Foley, did an amazing unit. She loved the whole centrifugal force. So in doing so, she did a unit where it was just one thing with their final version. You can see how incredible the final version of this is with the details and designs. And they did a much more math connected. So they had science and math was really their big concepts. Well, and of course, art. So she did a mandala unit based on that. Huge PowerPoint. It talked all about the history of the mandala. And then had the students experiment on the pottery wheel in the same way, talking about centrifugal force. And then she did a lot with measuring and laying out the design with measurement and all of that for the math concepts. So her final result, you can see this little version over here, just beautiful. And all of them are just gorgeous. So hers was much more one unit that she focused on, but going through the same process. What's great is that after she finished that, she had some stations set up just like I did, where they would go work at stations once they finished that unit. Excuse me. So in the technology category, I would keep the stop motion animation. That's fantastic. Had a great little planning unit that had to do ahead of time. The machine drawing I enjoyed, but I think I would change it up a little bit because there's we have 5 iPads in the art room now, and so many apps that are just art apps that are incredible out there. So I think I would research a little bit more about different apps that would work well and integrate that. Especially the ones that match the STEAM concept. So it's just a matter of research over the summer. I think that's going to be when I sort of upgrade or offer 3 different areas. So I don't necessarily have to stick to just 2. It depends on how many stations I want to have. So it does get a little bit, it could be a little too much to try to handle more than that. So I might either have to decide, okay, do I want to get rid of the meat machine or have that at a different date? But I did like the concept of really playing with the iPads and the apps because there's so, like I said, there's so much available out there and that would really fit with that, especially the videos and starting to get into the voice into a video and that sort of thing. So we'll look into that more. Some other things I would change or how I can improve. So the math component, I consider taking the math section separate. So I actually tried that out this quarter because I have different quarters of students in my middle school. Last quarter I had them do all 8 stations at the same time and kind of do that rotation. This quarter I actually had them do the math component, which was great because I was able to kind of demonstrate the process of how we go through all of the stations, and they had a choice of the 2 different math components, so I let them have their choice ahead of time. Then I also showed them the process of how we go into Google Classroom and load that in after using Artsonia. So it's kind of teaching them the whole Artsonia process so they can load a little easier, so I didn't necessarily have to take them all in the computer room or computer lab to do that process. They could kind of do it all in the classroom. So I did enjoy having the math stations first, and then I'm going to do the other 6 stations later. I think it'll give them the opportunity to hit more stations if they weren't able to before, and minimize too many choices where some students get like, oh, okay, I'm done. I want them to stay focused. They are very motivated, usually through the duration of this. As they get towards the end of it's about 2 weeks that it takes for this process. As they get towards the end, sometimes they sort of burn out a little bit. Certain students, definitely not all of them. So I liked introducing the entire STEAM concept. I kind of started out with the math station idea. Talked about the whole STEAM concept so throughout the quarter they can make more connections as they do other projects as well. Because there's so many connections in art that it's nice to have them connect throughout the whole process, or through the quarter, excuse me. So once they complete their math station, like I said, they went on to Artsonia and Google, and we did that process already this quarter. So it's nice for them to see that. And now they can when we go onto the actual stations themselves, they're going to just apply it themselves. They already know it. I'll just do a little refresher, and that'll be much easier, I think, to load that. All right, well, perfect timing. Look at this, about 45 minutes, and I have questions at this point. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, fantastic.
Let's see here. Allison, are you going to unmute people, or should I just read some questions that people have posted?
Why don't we start with how many people? There's 5. We could probably unmute.
Okay.
Cool.
So let me do that. Welcome to the party, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome, everybody. Eileen Schneider, you had a question for Laurel a few minutes ago. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I missed the first part. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Eileen.
Oh, good. Hey, how you doing? I missed the first bit. Just I was having a little trouble with my.
Yeah.
This is just a 2-week.
Yeah, these stations last over duration 2.5 weeks, but yeah, they don't have to hit every station. So they have to hit 1 station from every content area. So at least 4 stations. But yeah, it's a 2-week duration. So it's a very experimental. Go to each station, try them out. Understand that my 2 weeks is a little different than most people because when I do my students' work, they might have some that are finishing and then they'll start the stations after I've done the demos, and other students might be finishing up a work of art. So the 2 weeks kind of spans. It'll span over 2.5, 3 weeks sometimes, depending on the student itself.
So you actually take a day to just do demos on each each thing, or do you have little videos that they play to get
multiple things? I had a PowerPoint that's running, so when I do a demonstration on certain ones, yeah, I kind of break them up. I sort of like would talk about math. Okay, for the math ones, we're going to do this, and that's why I kind of started this quarter. I did the math first, like I almost did it like separate from the whole station thing. So they've done the math now at this point, and they understand the station process later, but they understood how to load it and how to put it into Artonia and Google Classroom and all of that. So I kind of did that ahead of time. So they had to choose one of the two math that they could do. They had to create it. We went through the process. That way I demonstrated those. So it will be a little easier for the demonstrations because you're right, it took a while, the demonstrating process. I don't go into a lot of depth because I want them to really experiment. So the key is that they experiment. And then they would start teaching each other. Sorry.
Laurel, you see your students every day, though.
I do. I see them every day for 45 days. Yep.
Okay.
Now, in my school, as soon as you say math, people shut down. Are you not having that experience?
No, they were so excited about the math one, actually. When I showed them my Kaleidoscope Cycle before I really even talked about it, they're like, oh my gosh, how do you do that? Because I had one that was finished and I was just twisting it. Like, that's so cool. And then other kids that were really into drawing loved the ratio. So I probably had almost a half and half where some chose the Kaleidoscope Cycle and some chose the grid drawing. I demonstrated both and I said, your choice is up to you. I didn't care if they all wanted to do Kaleidoscope Cycle. That was fine with me. But I gave them the option. So it was pretty cool. But they were pretty excited. But again, we're middle school, you're high school, there might be a little bit of a difference there too. But yeah. you know how that goes.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I love all those assignments. They're fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, like I said, I would love to get those microscopes. As you said, he had about 5 microscopes. So we're doing a scientific one where they had to look in a microscope really close up to something they collected outside or something and then draw it. Would be amazing. That would be such a cool connection because they talk about how, he was telling me how kids can't draw. He's like, we'd tell them to draw something that they're, looking at in a microscope and they can't do it. I said, oh, it'd be great to like work on that. So it'd be a fun connection.
The pen you got, what pen did you get?
3D pen, these ones, hold on one second. I'm going to tell you I grabbed my box. I have it right here. Okay, it's pretty generic. This one just says V4 3D Drawing Your Dream Printing Pen. Made by, it just says V4 on there. I don't really see a name besides that. But they're simple looking pens, very straight. What's that?
Are you having any trouble with them?
No, one's in a great, I have 2 right now that it's not taking the feed anymore, so I'm going to see if my custodians might be able to like take it apart and maybe fix that part, hopefully. But I had 12 total that we were sharing between 2 classrooms, so I had stations of about 5 of them at a time. And I would kind of change them out if it got a little. But they seem pretty good. The problem you run into, I have different ways I got the 3D filament. Some are kind of just little rolls that aren't on anything, but it's a roll of it, which is great. Those stay the same size. But there's some that are on this like the spool, and if it's on the spool, it gets smaller as it gets to the center of the spool, and then it won't feed anymore on these pens. So that's a little bit of an issue. I'll probably just donate that to the tech ed department because I know they do like a feed and they have a 3D printer, then maybe they could use that. But that was one issue I ran into with that. But overall, they've been great. I didn't have much with them sticking or anything. So great question though. Yeah.
I have a question, Laurel,
sure.
about you have kids uploading to Artsonia their photos. And
yeah,
And then what? Can I ask why you're using Artsonia for that?
Because we use it anyway. That's something we use for 7th and 8th grade, so that's part of what we do here. So I just kind of said, hey, it's an easy way, it's an easy vehicle to use to have it loaded for them already. And Artsonia is such a simple process for us. I mean, you could do it in any way.
Gallery for them?
Yeah, they have their own online gallery from 7th to 8th grade. They have all their artwork for everything they've created. So they have a whole portfolio.
Portfolios.
Yeah, yeah. And so they have all their work in there. Sorry, what's that?
What do they upload to Google Classroom?
Google Classroom, I just had it so I could lay it out with the Steam so I could really see their connection. So we just went, like I said, we went into the computer lab for the Google Classroom component, and they could just go right from Artsonia, copy, paste it right in. So it was very easy, that transition.
Okay.
So it was just an easy way to pop in it because they already had the photo, if that makes sense.
Good.
Yeah, it was a nice way to hold the images. So we had, like, say they had, most of them had like 6 or 7 photos, that they had to pop into their Google Classroom, and that was the easiest way to get to it, I thought, instead of them trying to figure out a way to save it maybe. And I guess they could have saved it in their Google Drives or something and then done it, but I didn't really know how to do that. So I figured it was easier. We had Artsonia anyway. It's a great process. They're used to it, so that was probably the easiest way I figured to do that.
anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, you said the note taking was a problem. Do you have them ever whip out their phone and just take a picture and write the note later, or do you think that?
That's a good idea. Not all of them have phones. I think, you know, in high school you might have more. Kids do ask me to do if they could do that. Can I take a photos? And I always say, sure, go ahead, have a photo. But that's not a bad idea. I think I just need to set up like a little table in each area where they can have just some paper there that they can just jot down notes or whatever. Because I had little forms for them to fill out, and they kind of got a little cumbersome because there was a staple and they had to open it to see it. So I don't know if there's an easier way. Like I said, I had the PowerPoint running on the smartboard, so that did help, and they could always look at that too. But I kind of wanted them to just jot down notes, especially when they were experimenting, like with the centrifugal force on the pottery wheels and that sort of thing. So, I mean, a lot of times they could remember their experimentation and know what they did, but I kind of wanted a little bit of a accurate description of that. But
what if you gave them, or you just placed piles of sticky notes at each station?
Oh, that's a good idea. Right. That's a really good idea. Jotting that down. Sticky notes. Yeah, that's a really good idea. I should just do that because we have tons, actually, now that you say that. We have hundreds of sticky notes in the back row that we had ordered. So that's a great idea. And then they could just jot it down. It doesn't really have to be something that they keep. So I think that's a great way to do it. Because what they'll do is they'll take their notes when they go in the Google Classroom, and that's where they would kind of jot that down. Awesome. Thanks for that info. Is that you, Cindy?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
I'm the sticky queen, you know that.
Yeah, I know, right? That's a great idea. Good.
Anybody else have any questions out there for Laurel? Well, this is great. I learned a lot. I think it was really a great webinar. I think once we get this archived, it'll be made available for other people who would signed up to be able to see it. So I can make it this afternoon.
Great. Yeah, if they need my contact info, please send it to them. So if they have any questions, that'd be fantastic. Thank you all for being part of this. So